It's such an important topic. People get married on average like 10 years later now than they did.
It's destroying the country.
That's right.
And all of Western civilization. It really is. I mean, people aren't having babies. He's exactly right. People aren't getting married at an age where they actually are able to grow up with one another because your wife shapes you and you shape her, and that makes you both better people. I mean, when I married my wife, I just turned 24 and she was 20, and we've spent our lives growing up together. Right? I mean, now I'm 38 and she's 35, and that's a long time to spend. I mean, half her life, basically. We've spent together. And that means that you grow and you change and you have experiences, and then you bring kids into the world, and that radically changes you even more than just the marriage did. And when Jordan says that if you're 40 and single, you're blowing it, he is cutting directly against the grain of all current conventional wisdom, which is the best thing that you can do is delay marriage until you make associate at the law firm working 2,200 hours.
Well, now they say grow up and then get married. And in the past, they said, get married and grow up.
So that you can grow up.
So my dad used to make a point about this. He used to say, people would ask him about when to get married. And he said, well, or how to find the right person. And what he always said is you have to make the decision to get married before you find the right person. Because if you didn't make the decision that you wanted to get married, then the right person could come along and you could just pull them out of the water. You actually have to make we live in a society where we sort of decide the opposite. It's like, I'll fall in love with the person, and then we'll have sex, and then maybe 4 years down the road we'll get married. We've completely reversed the polarity and the order of events. Look at the sitcoms from the 90s versus the sitcoms from the 60s, right? In the 60s it was, you fall in love, you get married, you have sex. Now it's, you have sex, and then it's really hard for you to say if you fell in love with the person, right? That's like the big move in a sitcom now is, did you fall in love? And then you never get married. I mean, marriage is so passé.
Well, marriage is the series finale. There's another aspect of this, which is that as we delay the onset of adulthood, the left also wants to reduce the age of things like voting. I don't think 18-year-olds today should be able to vote, is the honest truth. And you could say, well, you're saying that people should be able to serve in the military and they shouldn't be able to vote. Well, I'll let those ones vote, because they're doing something that grows you up called joining the military.
Right.
But no, the whole point of having a voting age is that we don't want children voting. Children aren't mature. They don't have stakes. They don't understand the stakes that they do have. And so we don't want it. Matt got in a little bit of trouble for some comments that he made back when he was a shock jock about at what age people should have sex. And I don't want to rehash all the terrain, except to say that it is
what age they should get married.
At what age they should get married. It is, thank you. It is absolutely the case that for the vast majority of human history, people who were of the age of sexual maturity were considered candidates for marriage. We all agree now that that cannot possibly be the standard because you're still a kid for so long. The reason it's creepy for people to get married super young now because it cuts against everything that we think about the maturing process and the age at which people should be mature. And in some ways, that's a byproduct of our success, right? We've been very successful as a species. We can protect people younger. We don't have to shove you out in the field to work in the sun when you're 9 years old. We don't have to put those responsibilities.
Your life expectancy isn't 35.
Life expectancy isn't 35. And so I don't want to make it sound as though every aspect of that progress that we've had is bad. But the fact that we say that one should not grow up or that marriage isn't an instrumental part of the process of growing up, I do think is really bad.
It used to be that we said, okay, we'll delay adulthood, right? Adulthood isn't when you're 14. My wife's grandmother got married at 14 in Morocco, right?
Almost all of our great-grandparents probably got married.
The Virgin Mary was probably 15 when she got married.
But we don't do that anymore. But real adulthood sets in when you're 18, right? And now real adulthood sets in after death. That's the idea in our society is not to push back the line a little bit so that you actually have a little bit more brain development and can make better decisions about your values. The idea is obliterate the line so it doesn't exist. Well, the problem with that goes both ways. One is that you're obliterating adulthood so that you have fully grown adults who are acting like children. The other is if there's no distinction between adults and children, then you can start treating children like adults, right? And this is what you're currently seeing with the trans movement. The next thing that's going to happen, again, I think we are living in that meme, the slippery slope meme. I did a whole podcast on this last week. The slippery slope meme that shows the slippery slope and it shows it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And then at the bottom, there's an arrow that says, you are here. Yep. Right? And that's exactly what it is, right? I mean, they keep saying it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. We're never going to do that. Well, you guys are currently making the argument that a 5-year-old is capable of choosing his gender. So I'm going to need you to explain how it's okay for a 5-year-old to choose his gender for the rest of his life, but that child is not capable of sexual choice.
Somebody.
By the way, I don't think a child is capable of either. So I'm consistent. So I'm asking you, why don't you be consistent? Explain to me how kids are able to consent to chopping off their at the age of 16,
Yeah.
but they're not able.
What you're saying is that we're on the verge of the moment when the left tries to say that children can engage in sex with adults, essentially.
Yes, I mean, and what they're going to do is
it's happening also. By the way, that very movement.
Oh, 100%. And what it'll start with what they've already started to do with is sort of these Romeo and Juliet laws, right? It'll start with, it's okay for a 15-year-old to have sex with a 13-year-old. What's really the problem? And then it'll be, is 16 so bad? And then I was like, is 18 so bad? I mean,
this is why I disagree with you about grooming. I think they are grooming children for sexuality. That is their definition of identity.
Well, but is it that you're disagreeing, or you're discussing the two sides of the very same thing, which is you're describing the physical enactment of it, and you're describing the metaphysical version of it. But the whole point is, they're kind of the same, you know. I mean, they're kind of intertwined.
By the way, what you talked about growing up in a marriage is doubly important because you're growing up with a woman.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I married my wife like most people marry their wife because she was hot, she was beautiful, she was fun, she was smart, she was all those things that really attracted. But it wasn't till about 10 years after we had been together when I started to think like, oh, you know, like for the first 10 years I was thinking, well, of course she has no capacity for reason. You know, I don't understand a word she said. But then I kept noticing that she was right a lot of the time when she, and I couldn't understand it. And I started to think, oh, she's actually seeing the world from a different point of view. And that is like putting on those red and blue glasses that suddenly turn the world into 3 dimensions. You're suddenly become one flesh, one person, and you see things in a new and deeper and richer way. And that to me transforms everything. Yeah. Because, you know, I'm never going to stop being a guy. She's never going to stop being a girl. She's the girliest girl I know. I'm a very guy-like guy. But now I live in a unity of male-female that actually transforms everything into reality, into a reality you don't see before.
And the other advantage of getting, you know, it's kind of like is marriage the cornerstone of adulthood or the capstone? And the advantage to it being the cornerstone of young adulthood is that, as you said, you're building a life together, an existence together, as opposed to let's get married when we're 35 or 40, and now I have all of my own stuff. Everything is mine. I have my own life, my own money. This is all mine. And now you are coming into this thing that I have built without you.
And by the way, all your own experiences and all the crap from your past, right, which you see really break up marriages. People come in with all these terrible experiences they've already had with members of the opposite sex, and then they get married. And they're already heavily shaped. And
that's why we hear so much about, well, you know, at the root of a lot of divorces is money. And I guess that's the case. But for someone like myself, I got married young. I can't even imagine why that would be the case. We don't have any money issues in my marriage because all the money, I make the money, but it's our money.
It's in a joint bank account. Like it was in a joint bank account literally the day we got married.
And I'm also aware because as I've been growing and building my career and all that, I've had my wife with me, and none of this would have happened without her. So it's very clear to me that this is something we did together.
Well, for I think all of us. So I think none of us were either rich or famous. Some of us are still not rich or famous. but for those of us who are both wealthy and famous, I think all of us were married to our spouses long before we had any of those things. Yeah. And that is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing.
I mean,
it allows you
married a writer, you know, like how crazy was that?
I mean, but the fact that your spouse can still look at you, and this is what you're saying, you know, if the marriage happens late, this can't happen. The fact that my wife can still look at me as the person who, you know, was 23 and just out of law school, and she can say, I see through all this crap, right? Like none of this makes a bit of difference to me. Right? The person who you are is not the person who the rest of the world sees. It's the person who I've known since long before you were that to the rest of the world. That's an amazing thing. It also gives you the ability to have somebody who calls you on your bullshit, which is like an actual real thing. Once you get, you know, to a certain level of power, people just are really, really afraid to call you on your bullshit. And having a group of people, whether it's friends or particularly your wife, who's able to do that is vital. Because if you don't have that, you spin off the rails incredibly fast.
Yeah. It actually didn't occur to me until you said that I think every single one of us got married relatively broke. Or at least, you're right, I think every single one of us did.
Totally.
And it did, I have noticed too, that the harshest critic and kind of best shaper of my show is sweet little Elisa, where I'll have something that I'm going to do on the show or in a speech or something where I think it's absolute dynamite, and she'll, you know, Mike, it just doesn't work, Mike. I'm sorry. No, and I think no, but it actually. Nah, you're right. You're right. She's always right.
That's kind of what we're talking about with Fetterman. Is that I think a good wife is your number one fan. She's rooting for you. She really believes in you and believes in your dreams and your aspirations.
Because you're her number one fan also.
Right, exactly. But she also, you know, I think as men, we need a woman to let us know when we're biting off more than we can chew, when we've hatched, because as men, we're going to hatch all kinds of crazy schemes and plans. I know that I do anyway. And you need a woman there because she could see that blind spot, and she's going to tell you, well, that's not going to work. Whereas I think for men, on the other hand, this is my gender stereotypical way of looking at it, is that, I rely on my wife to let me know when I've got some idea, some plan that's just like utterly self-destructive. It's going to destroy the whole family.
But by the way, that last sentence is the key, right? That last part of the sentence, that it's going to destroy the whole family. Because my wife tends to think in terms of the effect on the family, right? As a man, my main thing is like, what is my effect on the world? I mean, I literally do that for a living. What is my effect on the world? What's my effect on society? What's my effect on the people who listen to the show? And so I'll try to overcommit. Okay, I want to get all these things done, right? I mean, there's so much to do before you die, right? You got to get out there, you got to travel, you got to change people, you got to do all this. And my wife will say, yes, but what about the kids?
Yep.
Like, do you want to be away for that night? Do you want to be able to put the kids in bed?
Matt, I want you to finish that thought.
Yeah, well, so I think on the other side, so that's what we rely on women for. I think on the other hand, as men, women will tend to get involved in, they might get involved in personal feuds and take things very personally and have a tendency to overreact in those sorts of situations. And that's where men can be the voice of reason and say, well, I don't think they really meant it like that. I don't think that's exactly what. Now, it doesn't mean that women are going to listen all the time, but I do think that's the kind of, we can both be the voice of reason and calm for each other in these different situations and see each other's blind spots.
Well, we actually have an explicit deal with my wife, which is neither of us is allowed to be, we're not allowed to be grumpy at the same time. We have to take turns. We'll balance it out. I'll literally be like, it's my turn to be grumpy. I get to be grumpy right now. And she'll go, okay, all right. And then when it's time for her to be grumpy, then I'll say, okay, you know what? You're right. It's your turn to be grumpy. And you do need that balance. And again, the differences between men and women are not only beautiful, they are vital. And pretending that those differences are of no consequence whatsoever, and that other alternative forms of family structure are therefore equivalent in any way at all, they're different. They're different. I mean, there's no other way to put that.
But this is why, to both of these points, this is why the personal is the political is so powerful. One, it obviously came from the feminists because women tend to be more personally focused. And traditionally, women took care of the private part of life, and men were more public-facing and were more interested in the political side. And so it's no surprise that the feminists would then seek to meld those two. But then it's obviously the case that the personal is the political. The country is just made up of people and of our personal lives. And so we think of marriage as being private. Well, if marriage becomes completely distorted, that's obviously going to have political effects. And you've seen that play out now for 60 years.